Prof. I'm Mahi, and along with my teammates, we'll be presenting our project on electrical vehicles. This is the agenda of our presentation. I will be exploring non-relational databases and contrasting them with their more structured counterparts, the relational databases. Relational databases are like well-organized libraries, storing data in structured tables governed by predefined rules. They maintain data relationships meticulously and excel in managing them, which is crucial for systems handling sensitive data. Onto non-relational databases, unlike their structured counterparts, these databases don't confine data to tables. Instead, they come in varied models like key value or document oriented, offering flexibility to handle diverse data formats. They don't rely on rigid schemas, allowing for easier adaptations as data structures evolve. Let us now highlight some key distinctions between the two. Storage model. While relational databases store data in rows and tables, non-relational databases opt for alternative models like key value or document-oriented structures, storing data in versatile formats such as the single document in JSON format. Schemas. Relational databases utilize static schemas, whereas their non-relational counterparts adopt dynamic schemas. Scaling. Relational databases possess vertical and horizontal scaling capabilities, whereas non-relational databases primarily focus on horizontal scaling, simplifying expansion across multiple servers to accommodate growing data volumes and user demands. This diversity and adaptability in non-relational databases position them ideally for handling unstructured or semi-structured data. Their flexibility proves invaluable in applications dealing with vast and varied information, making them a go-to choice for managing data in modern scenarios.
Now, moving on to our first question, is EV really green compared with various vehicle types? Our data exploration has found that there are three types of vehicles in the CO2 emission Canada dataset. They are plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, PHEV, battery electric vehicles, BEV, and non-electric vehicles. The analysis of the output results highlights that BEVs exhibit the lowest tailpipe CO2 emissions, followed by PHEVs, and then the traditional non-electric vehicles. Notably, BEVs still indicate some tailpipe CO2 emissions in the dataset, suggesting potential data inaccuracies. PHEVs show lower CO2 emissions as they mainly rely on electric batteries, while non-electric vehicles generate the highest emissions due to the continuous reliance on internal combustion engines and fuel combustion. As research has shown that alternative fuels such as ethanol and natural gas play a vital role in conserving petroleum and reducing vehicle emissions, we decided to look into the tailpipe CO2 emissions of these vehicles. In our analysis, as shown by the graph on the left, ethanol exhibits the highest tailpipe CO2 emissions, attributed to its lower energy output compared to traditional fuels. The graph also showed that natural gas generated less tailpipe CO2 emissions. Natural gas burns more cleanly than conventional fuel, resulting in lower CO2 emissions during combustion. At first glance, the graph may suggest that PHEVs using premium gasoline produce higher tailpipe CO2 emissions than non-EVs using regular gasoline or natural gas, potentially indicating PHEVs' lesser environmental friendliness. However, research indicates that premium gasoline contributes to increased tailpipe CO2 emissions compared to regular gasoline. Additionally, while natural gas produces lower CO2 emissions, it leads to higher methane emissions, a more dangerous greenhouse gas than CO2. This underscores that alternative fuels may not significantly outperform electric vehicles in terms of environmental impact. It was found that the size of a vehicle has a direct impact on its tailpipe CO2 emissions, as larger vehicles are equipped with more extensive batteries and internal combustion systems to accommodate the usage demands. Notably, PHEVs, SUV standard vehicle class, exhibits lower tailpipe CO2 emissions compared to non-EVs within the same vehicle class. However, it is crucial to recognize the significance of promoting the use of smaller electric vehicle classes to further reduce tailpipe CO2 emissions. While BEVs and PHEVs themselves emit minimal CO2, it is acknowledged that emissions occur during electricity production and distribution. Nonetheless, the pie chart indicates global efforts to shift towards renewable energy sources, reducing the overall CO2 emissions associated with electric vehicles throughout their lifespan compared with non-electric vehicles. While manufacturing EVs generate more emissions due to EV batteries, studies consistently showed that over their lifespan, EVs generally have lower overall emissions, especially when powered by renewable electricity. The transition to cleaner energy sources during production and a focus on battery recycling contribute to sustainability and reduce environmental impact. Coupled with the use of renewable energy, electric vehicles are believed to generate significantly fewer emissions over their lifespan compared to non-EVs. Further efficiency gains achievable through minimizing vehicle size and weight.
Now I will be discussing question 12, which is about the feasibility of the full conversion in Singapore. So before diving into the assessment of full conversion, we can look at the 3 indicators we have identified to measure the success of full conversion. Firstly, are the greenhouse gases lower and is able to meet the net zero carbon emission by 2050? Secondly, there is a clear increase in the trend of EV population and the number of EV stations available in Singapore. Thirdly, Singapore government's preparation of the full conversion is seen, as its plan is essential in determining whether the goal of changing fully to EVs is viable in the long term. According to the online data, the most common type of EVs in Singapore are hybrid electric vehicles and the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. However, for these 2 types, as you can see from the data provided, there are still carbon emissions as their systems are designed as combustion of fossil fuel will be triggered when electricity is insufficient to support the operation of cars. This does not effectively reduce the carbon emission. Singapore should then adopt more EV stations to support the increase in demand for EVs as well as the electricity. Singapore's EV population have grown high to 6,500 registered vehicles. Singapore also has a very positive trend in the number of EV stations. As mentioned by the Ministry of Transport, there will be 60,000 EV stations across Singapore by 2030, and the location will be spread across different areas. From the case in Europe, it also shows that there is a positive trend in the number of EV stations deployed in the region, and by data collected, with more EV stations, it can effectively reduce the carbon emission by 95%. This data is a motivating factor for Singapore to increase the number of EV stations with the increase in EV population. Singapore also has a high likelihood to achieve its goal of full conversion and reduction in the carbon emission given the positive trend. Alternatively, Singapore should switch the emphasis to adopting more battery electric vehicles. Before looking at whether Singapore itself can be successful in full conversion, we first look at the given data. Washington, D.C. will serve as the reference point for Singapore in this adoption. Despite their EV stations to EV population ratio and other metrics being so different, but Washington's long-term commitment to launching EV initiative and their large number of EVs and stations provide insights for Singapore's own sustainable transportation goals. We then look into the Washington data on different vehicle types. There is a significant high number of BEVs in the state, which suggests a successful initiative, and Singapore should look at their strategies when it's considering importing more BEVs. Singapore also has an increasing trend in the number of BEVs over the past few years. With its continued growth and reference to Washington's data and implementation, we firmly believe that full conversion is certainly feasible for Singapore in the long term. Next, we can look at Singapore's strong government implementation to make the full conversion viable. Firstly, Model Intelligence has forecasted the EV market outlook in Singapore, and the result is relatively optimistic in the next 5 years. This forecast is never groundless. Besides the Singapore Green Plan 2030, LTA also introduced the comprehensive EV roadmap aimed at driving widespread adoption of EVs. It also launched the National Electric Vehicle Centre to lead the transition by 2040 while collaborating with various stakeholders. Overall, the plan is comprehensive and shows Singapore's dedicated commitment to full conversion in the near future. However, some constraints that we see cannot be neglected. Firstly is the high COE prices. The government has launched initiatives to lower the COE prices for EVs, but overall COE is still pricey, and the existing car owners may refuse to change as they find the cost of changing outweigh the benefits they will get after changing to EVs. This limits the effectiveness of the government's actions in rolling out more EVs and stations. Government may need to do more for an effective plan of full conversion. Another constraint is that Singapore has also invested heavily on the EV initiatives, but unprecedented events have disrupted the supply chain in Singapore, which makes the plan have no choice but to push back. The percentage increase in the EV population is present but still considered slow, suggesting that the conversion still needs some time to be fully developed. The longer time for implementation is anticipated if Singapore wants to see a successful full conversion.
I will proceed to address the inquiry regarding our team's recommendation for the optimum locations to deploy the upcoming 60,000 charging stations. Before going into the recommendation, we'll be using data from Washington counties as a starting point. Using the population density heat map obtained from the US Office of Financial Management, it shows that King and Clark has the highest population density. In comparison to other counties, Okanagan has one of the lowest population density, despite having the largest land area. The data provided indicates that a significant number of counties with the highest number of charging stations also have the highest population density. Additionally, counties with smaller population density, such as Okanagan, possesses a moderate number of charging stations. Conversely, Island, despite having a higher population density, exhibits a lower number of charging stations. This implies that while population density plays a crucial role in determining the quantity of charging stations in counties, it is not the sole factor. The consideration of land area is also imperative in understanding this relationship. From a data source online, it becomes evident that even the most densely populated counties in Washington, such as King and Clark, fall short of matching the population density observed in many residential areas of Singapore. This disparity may be attributed to varying approaches in urban planning adopted by local governments. Nevertheless, the data from Washington can be used as a rough estimate for Singapore to understand the relationship between the number of charging stations and population density. Therefore, the charging station should be built in more densely populated areas in Singapore. In 2022, around 77% of Singapore residents were residing in public housing provided by the HDB. Given the common inclusion of car parks in close proximity to residential blocks within HDB estates, our team recommends prioritizing the establishment of charging stations in these public car parks. This approach is designed to incentivize residents to choose electric vehicles over traditional internal combustion engine vehicles. By ensuring easy access to nearby charging stations for overnight charging, we aim to facilitate the readiness of vehicles for the following day. It's important to note, however, that the charging stations are considered an additional amenities rather than a necessity. Consequently, the upgrading of existing HDB car parks should take precedence in areas or regions where there is adequate electric capabilities to support slow charging stations. Another potential location for the charging station is the Central Business District, offering a convenient option for office workers to charge their electric vehicles during working hours. Our emphasis on slow charging stations is contingent upon the current capacity of our power grid. In the event of a significant power grid upgrade, an alternative proposal might involve having fast charging stations at locations such as petrol stations and shopping malls. This is particularly viable considering that a standard battery can achieve full charge from empty within just 30 minutes using a fast charging station. Thank you. I will now be passing my time on to Shane.
Thank you, Chin-Zi. I'll now be covering question 14. Firstly, we start by defining what turn around the climate crisis means. Based on the UN report, CO2 emissions need to be cut by 45% by 2030 compared to 2010 levels. Next, oil consumption is the main source of energy for many industries and one of the largest contributors of CO2 emissions. For example, in 2022, petroleum oil accounted for about 36% of US energy consumption, but petroleum oil was the source of 46% of total annual US energy-related CO2 emissions. Hence, we can deduce that a single unit of oil leads to a larger unit of CO2 emissions. This can also be seen when we compare oil to other fuels like natural gas. Therefore, to turn around the climate crisis, we will make the assumption that oil consumption must be reduced by minimally 45% of 2010 volumes by the year 2030. To understand the use cases of oil, we can turn to the transportation sector, which accounts for 96% of all petroleum oil usage. This sector includes motor vehicles, which accounts for 48% of global transport carbon dioxide emissions. Hence, we will be using two key data sets. Firstly, energy consumption behavior of countries, and secondly, EV sales of countries. The results are as follows. The graph on the left identifies the top 10 countries that have reduced oil consumption by the largest volume. And on the right is the corresponding reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. There are two key interesting insights here. Firstly, increase in oil consumption does not always translate to an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. Examples here are Singapore and Qatar. This could be due to better carbon capture storage measures. Secondly, there are a few notable countries which have shown a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions after significantly reducing their oil consumption. Notable countries here include Japan, Mexico, and Italy. Next, the chart on the left identifies the top 10 countries that have the highest increase in number of EV sales. The only countries that appear in the top 10 for both lists are Sweden and Italy. Hence, this shows that an increase in EV adoption does lead to a decrease in oil consumption and a decrease in CO2 emissions. However, there are many countries that do not appear in the top 10, for example, China, Germany, and the USA, of which we will be diving into China given that it is one of the largest emitters of CO2. China is a unique case because despite a substantial increase in EV adoption of 3.25 million, oil consumption increased by 57%. There are two possible reasons for this. Firstly, substantial quantities of oil are required to sustain China's vast manufacturing industries, encompassing the likes of apparel and electronics manufacturing. Secondly, this rise in oil consumption could be attributed to the resurgence of domestic travel. Additionally, China's target of achieving net zero carbon emissions is the year 2060, which is comparatively later than that of most advanced economies, aiming for net zero by 2050. Thus, this suggests a probable decline in oil usage only in the latter years leading up to 2060. In conclusion, with over 26 million electric vehicles on the road, and given that electric vehicle adoption will be expected to continue to increase, it remains feasible to turn around the climate crisis on a national level, at least, given countries like Sweden and Italy already paving the way. And these countries have also met more than halfway of their goal of achieving 45% reduction of CO2 emissions of 2010 levels. However, on an international level, greater cooperation is required, especially from the giants like China. Ultimately, there are two additional important factors to consider, which is firstly, countries must not use the oil offset by electric vehicles for other purposes like manufacturing. Secondly, time is required to phase out current internal combustion engine vehicles. Now I hand the time over to Mahi, who will be covering the next segment.
Thank you, Shane. I will be talking about short-term and long-term measures to transition away from fossil fuels. In the immediate future, there are several actionable plans to address this dependency. Firstly, transitioning to ethanol. Ethanol emits fewer emissions than traditional fossil fuels, and its compatibility with existing vehicles and infrastructure enables a relatively swift adoption process. Singapore can also leverage its established ethanol distribution network and implement strategic policy initiatives such as tax breaks and subsidies. Another immediate solution involves the rapid expansion of solar rooftop installations. Encouraging businesses and households to adopt solar panels, especially in a city with abundant sunlight, presents an immediate energy source. The result, less strain on the grid and a notable decrease in Singapore's carbon footprint. More energy efficiency measures like the Green Mark scheme, promoting energy efficient building designs coupled with optimized public transportation systems, aim to reduce energy and consumption during off-peak hours. These energy-saving initiatives can be swiftly implemented across industries. Now, we move on to discuss the long-term strategies that can be implemented to achieve Singapore's mission of zero net carbon emissions by 2050. One key strategy involves extensive collaboration with neighboring nations. This collaborative effort enables Singapore to overcome space constraints by investing in solar and wind projects in neighboring countries. Solar farms in regions with ample space and offshore wind farms near coastlines tap into abundant solar and wind energy. Another vital facet of Singapore's long-term plan involves transitioning its transportation sector towards electric vehicles. Charging networks specifically spread across the city-state, advancements in EV technology, and significant subsidies and incentives are pivotal to driving this transition. Furthermore, smart grid implementation aligns with Singapore's vision for energy efficiency and sustainability. These grids optimize energy distribution by integrating renewable resources and ensuring a stable power supply. In conclusion, these comprehensive strategies underscore Singapore's dedication to immediate action and long-term sustainability. Each measure, carefully tailored to Singapore's context and sustainability goals, serves as a stepping stone towards a greener and a more resilient future. Thank you.